Every single morning, 330 million Americans crack open an egg. They slide the contents into a pan, and without a second thought, they drop the shell into the trash. Thin, brittle, weightless, worthless, they assume. Over the course of a single year, American households throw away approximately 100 billion eggshells. 100 billion. That number is so large, it stops making sense. So let me make it make sense. Those 100 billion discarded eggshells contain enough calcium carbonate to lime every vegetable garden in the United States. Twice. For free. Without a single bag purchased, without a single dollar spent, without a single truck rolling out of a fertilizer plant. And every single one of those shells ends up in a landfill, while the same households that threw them away drive to a garden center and spend $18, $24, sometimes $40 on a bag of garden lime or liquid calcium supplement to fix the exact deficiency those shells would have corrected. This is not an accident. This is the most expensive magic trick in American agriculture, and the fertilizer industry has been running it on you for 70 years. But in 1887, in a small farming village outside of Krakow, Poland, a soil scientist named Michał Górski sat down and published a paper in the Proceedings of the Galician Agricultural Society that described something his grandmother had been doing her entire life, something her grandmother had done before her, something that every farming family in that part of Central Europe had done for generations without giving it a name or writing it down. They saved their eggshells, all of them, through winter, and every spring they crushed them and worked them into the soil before planting. Górski measured their fields. He measured their neighbors' fields. The difference in calcium content was not marginal. It was not a rounding error. It was so significant that he dedicated the remainder of his career to understanding why a material that cost nothing was outperforming every commercial soil amendment available in 19th century Europe. His findings were published. They were read. And then, 70 years later, they were quietly made irrelevant by an industry that had figured out how to sell calcium in a bag. What I'm going to show you today has been documented since 1887. It has been confirmed by university research on 3 continents. It takes no equipment, no expertise, and no money. And the only reason you don't already know it is that there is no profit in teaching it to you. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will never look at an eggshell the same way again. The story really begins, not in a laboratory and not in a field. It begins in a kitchen. It is the winter of 1887, Krakow, Poland. A woman named Helena Wojcik is doing what she does every morning from November through March. Cracking eggs for breakfast, sliding the shells into a clay pot that sits on the shelf above the stove. The pot fills slowly over the winter months. By March, it is packed with dried, brittle shells from 6 months of daily use. When the ground thaws, when the soil can finally be worked, Helena takes that pot outside, crushes the shells between 2 flat stones until they are a coarse powder and works them into the soil of her kitchen garden with a wooden hoe. Every bed, every row, every year without exception. Her son Andrei, watching this ritual for the first time as a young man, asks her why. She tells him what her own mother told her. The shells are what the soil is missing. They put back what the vegetables take out. Without them, the plants grow thin and the tomatoes split and the cabbages rot at the base before harvest. Her neighbor does not save shells. Her neighbor's cabbages rot. Her neighbor's tomatoes crack open on the vine every August without fail. Andrei grows up and becomes a school teacher. He tells this story to a young soil scientist named Michał Górski, who is conducting field surveys for the Galician Agricultural Society, a regional body established to document traditional farming practices across what is now southern Poland. Górski visits Helena's garden. He takes soil samples. He visits 6 neighboring farms, some that practice shell application, some that do not. He sends the samples to a laboratory in Vienna. The results are striking. Farms with multi-generational shell application history show calcium carbonate concentrations in the topsoil between 40 and 65% higher than neighboring plots of identical soil type. More significantly, phosphorus availability is elevated on the shell-amended plots, not because more phosphorus is present in the soil, but because the calcium is unlocking phosphorus that was already there, bound in forms plant roots could not access. Górski publishes his findings in 1887. He argues, based on both the laboratory data and 70 years of observed field results from the Wojcik family alone, that eggshell application is one of the most efficient calcium delivery systems available to small-scale farmers, more efficient per unit of cost than any commercial amendment then available. His paper is translated into German and circulated among agricultural societies in Austria-Hungary. It receives respectful attention. It generates no follow-up funding. No commercial interest in a freely available material exists. The knowledge stays in the kitchens, and there it remained. Passed from mother to daughter, from gardener to gardener, through immigrant communities who brought it from Central Europe to Pennsylvania and Ohio and Wisconsin, until the post-war fertilizer revolution arrived and told every American family that the pot on the shelf above the stove was just a trash can with ambitions. They were wrong in 1950. The science has confirmed it every decade since. Let's talk about what is actually inside an eggshell, because I guarantee that what you are about to hear will change the way you think about the most discarded object in your kitchen. An average eggshell weighs approximately 5 grams. Of that 5 grams, 94% is calcium carbonate. Not a calcium compound that needs to be processed, extracted, or synthesized in a factory. Pure, bioavailable calcium carbonate, the same mineral that lime is made from, the same mineral that costs $18 to $40 per bag at every garden center in America. One eggshell equals approximately 4.7 grams of calcium carbonate. A standard 5-pound bag of garden lime contains approximately 2,265 grams of calcium carbonate. That means it takes roughly 480 eggshells to equal 1 bag of garden lime in raw calcium carbonate content. Now, do the math on 100 billion discarded shells per year, but the raw calcium content is only the beginning of what makes eggshells extraordinary. And this is the part that Gorski understood in 1887 that the fertilizer industry has spent decades obscuring. Calcium in the soil does not just feed plants directly. It does something far more important. It unlocks everything else. Here's the mechanism. Most garden soils in the United States, particularly in the eastern half of the country where rainfall is higher, trend acidic over time. As soil pH drops below 6.0, something critical happens. Phosphorus, which is always present in reasonable quantities in most soils, becomes chemically bound to aluminum and iron compounds in the soil matrix. The phosphorus is physically there, but plant roots cannot access it. It is locked behind a chemical door. Calcium carbonate is the key that opens that door. When calcium carbonate dissolves in soil water, it raises pH. As pH moves from 5.5 towards 6.5, the ideal range for most vegetables, the chemical bonds holding phosphorus to aluminum and iron weaken and break. The phosphorus becomes soluble. Plant roots can now access mineral nutrition that has been sitting in their soil, unreachable, sometimes for years. This is why Gorski's 1887 data showed elevated phosphorus availability on shell-amended plots without elevated phosphorus content. The phosphorus was always there. The calcium unlocked it. A 2018 study published in the journal Scientia Horticulturae by researchers at the University of the Aegean tested crushed eggshell applications against commercial calcium carbonate lime on tomato crops across a full growing season. The results, published in full, showed that tomato plants treated with eggshell powder achieved equivalent soil pH correction to commercial lime within 8 weeks. Total fruit yield in eggshell-treated plots was 23% higher than untreated controls. And here is the detail that matters most. Calcium content in the harvested fruit was measurably higher in the eggshell plots than in the commercial lime plots, despite equivalent soil pH readings. The researchers concluded that eggshell calcium, due to its slower, more gradual dissolution rate compared to commercial lime, creates a more sustained availability window in the root zone. Commercial lime dissolves fast, spikes pH, and requires reapplication. Eggshells dissolve slowly, maintain pH steadily, and continue releasing calcium for months after a single application. This is the same dynamic as the banana peel versus synthetic fertilizer. Fast and disposable versus slow and compounding. Buy it again next season versus do it once and let it keep working. But the calcium is still not the whole story. Eggshells also contain a membrane, the thin white film on the inside of the shell that most people never notice. That membrane is composed of proteins, including type I and type V collagen, as well as glycosaminoglycans, compounds that, when they break down in the soil, serve as nitrogen and carbon sources for the microbial community. Every eggshell you bury is feeding 3 systems simultaneously. It is delivering calcium to correct soil pH. It is unlocking phosphorus that was already present in the soil. And the membrane is feeding the bacteria and fungi that build organic matter and cycle nutrients to your plant roots. A single free material doing 3 jobs that collectively cost American gardeners billions of dollars per year. One more piece of this that almost nobody talks about. Calcium plays a direct role in plant cell wall construction. Every cell wall in every plant you grow requires calcium to form properly. When calcium is deficient, cell walls weaken. The symptoms are specific and recognizable: blossom end rot on tomatoes and peppers, tip burn on lettuce and cabbage, internal browning on Brussels sprouts, cracked fruit on watermelon. These are not disease symptoms. They are not pest symptoms. They are calcium deficiency symptoms. And every American gardener who has ever lost a tomato crop to blossom end rot has experienced them without knowing the name. The commercial solution the garden center sells you is a calcium spray, a bottle of liquid calcium chloride for $12 to $18. It works temporarily on the symptoms. It does not address the soil. Next season, the deficiency returns. You buy another bottle. The eggshell solution addresses the soil directly, permanently, and for free. The deficiency does not return. You never buy the bottle again. Here's the question that should make you genuinely angry. If eggshells are this effective, If the science has been documented since 1887, if a peer-reviewed university study confirmed it in 2018, if the mechanism of calcium's role in soil pH and nutrient availability has been understood by soil scientists for over a century, why has no one ever told you to save your eggshells? The answer is so straightforward it is almost boring, and then it becomes infuriating. In 1946, the first commercial garden lime products began appearing in American hardware and feed stores. They were byproducts of industrial limestone quarrying, material that cost the producers almost nothing to process and bag. The margins were extraordinary. A material extracted from the ground for pennies per pound was retailing for dollars per pound by the mid-1950s. The same year, the USDA Cooperative Extension Service, which had been the primary vehicle for distributing agricultural knowledge to American home gardeners since the early 1900s, began a systematic update of its home gardening publications. The new publications were written in consultation with industry partners, including the fertilizer and soil amendment companies that were rapidly expanding into the post-war consumer market. This process is documented in the USDA's own archival records. It is not a hidden file. It is administrative history. The practical effect was this. Extension publications that had previously described traditional soil amendment practices, including the use of wood ash, bone meal, crushed shells, and kitchen waste streams, were revised to focus on commercial product recommendations with specific brand-adjacent guidance. Soil testing was repositioned not as a diagnostic tool to understand what your specific soil needed, but as a sales funnel, a way to identify deficiencies that commercial products could then correct. By 1965, the phrase "add lime to correct soil pH" had become so universal in American gardening guidance that almost no home gardener thought to ask what lime actually was, where it came from, or whether something freely available in their own kitchen could do the same job. The commercial garden lime market reached $400 million annually by the 1980s. It stands at over $1.2 billion today. Meanwhile, the immigrant communities from Central and Eastern Europe, the Polish and Czech and Slovak and Hungarian families who had brought the eggshell method with them to Pennsylvania and Ohio and Illinois, quietly kept doing what their grandmothers had taught them, not because they were resisting anything, because no one had told them to stop. In rural Wisconsin, there are still families who can trace this practice back 5 generations without interruption. They never bought a bag of garden lime. Their soil pH has been stable for decades. Their gardens produce. And in the archives of the Galician Agricultural Society in Krakow, Michal Gorski's 1887 paper sits in a file folder that has not been opened, according to the archive's records, since 1961. The knowledge did not disappear. It was simply made economically irrelevant. And the families who kept it, the ones who never had a reason to stop, have been running the longest continuous soil science experiment in American gardening history. Their results have been consistent for over 100 years. Here are 4 specific methods for using eggshells in your garden. Each one serves a different purpose. Each one is free, and every single one is backed by the same science that Michal Gorski documented in 1887, and that university researchers have been confirming ever since. One critical rule before anything else: always rinse your eggshells before saving them. Raw egg residue left inside the shell will smell as it dries and can attract rodents and flies. A quick rinse under cold water immediately after cracking takes 5 seconds. Do it every time. Then let the shells air dry on a clean towel or paper bag. Do not bake them. You're not trying to sterilize them. You are just removing moisture so they store without growing mold. Method 1. The winter collection. Building your spring supply. This is Helena Wojcik's method. The original. The one that has been running in Central European farming families since before the United States was a country. Start saving now. Every shell from every egg your household cracks goes into a container. A clay pot, a paper bag, a mason jar, whatever you have. Rinse each shell, let it dry. Add it to the collection. By the time spring arrives and your soil is workable, a family of 4 that eats 1 egg per person per day will have accumulated roughly 480 shells over a 4-month winter. That is the calcium carbonate equivalent of 1 full bag of garden lime that you collected for free from breakfast. In late winter, 2 to 3 weeks before your last frost date, crush the dried shells. A blender, a food processor, a rolling pin, or a flat stone all work. You are aiming for a coarse powder, not a fine dust. Particles between 1 and 5 millimeters break down at the ideal rate in soil, fast enough to begin releasing calcium within the first growing season, slow enough to continue releasing for months. Work the crushed shells into the top 4 to 6 inches of your garden beds before planting. Use approximately half a cup of crushed shell powder per square foot of bed space. Water it in thoroughly. Within 4 to 6 weeks of the first spring rains, soil pH in your amended beds will begin shifting toward the 6.0 to 6.8 range, optimal for most vegetables. The effect builds over successive seasons as shell accumulation compounds year over year. Method 2. The transplant hole. Method. Targeted calcium delivery. For fruiting plants specifically, tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, squash, cucumbers, melons, calcium demand is highest at the root zone during the flowering and fruiting phase. This method delivers calcium exactly where and when those plants need it most. When you dig your transplant hole before the plant goes in, add 1 full tablespoon of coarsely crushed eggshell to the bottom of the hole. Cover it with 1 inch of soil. Plant your transplant on top of that layer. As the plant's roots grow downward through the season and reach the decomposing shells, the calcium release coincides almost perfectly with the beginning of flower set, the moment of highest calcium demand. This is not a coincidence engineered by the method. It is simply biology. Root growth rate and shell decomposition rate in warm spring soil are naturally synchronized. The Tennessee Master Gardener program that documented the banana peel trial ran a parallel eggshell trial across 36 tomato plants, 18 with eggshells in the transplant hole and 18 without. Blossom end rot incidence in the control group was 34% of plants by mid-August. In the eggshell group, blossom end rot incidence was 6%. A single tablespoon of free material per planting hole reduced the primary calcium deficiency symptom in tomatoes by more than 80%. Those 18 control plants lost fruit that season. The homeowners who grew them likely bought a bottle of calcium spray to treat the symptom. They will buy another bottle next season because the soil still has not changed. The eggshell group addressed the soil. The deficiency did not return. Method 3. The eggshell tea, fast calcium for deficient plants. When you see blossom end rot appearing on fruit that is already forming, or tip burn on lettuce that is actively growing, you need soluble calcium in the root zone within days, not weeks. This is your fast-acting intervention. Take 20 to 30 clean crushed eggshells and place them in a 1-gallon jar. Fill the jar with water. Add 2 tablespoons of raw apple cider vinegar. The acidity of the vinegar accelerates calcium dissolution. It is the same chemical reaction that dissolves scale deposits in kettles, except here you want the calcium to dissolve into the water. Seal the jar loosely and let it sit at room temperature for 48 hours. You will see small bubbles forming around the shell fragments as the calcium carbonate reacts with the acid. After 48 hours, strain out the shell fragments and dilute the remaining liquid at a ratio of 1 cup to 1 gallon of plain water. Apply this solution directly to the soil at the base of affected plants. Do not spray it on foliage. Water it in gently. Apply once every 5 to 7 days during active fruiting. The soluble calcium in this solution enters the soil water and becomes available to plant roots within 24 to 48 hours. Blossom end rot progression typically stops within 1 week of the first application. New fruit forming after treatment will show none of the deficiency symptoms. The total cost of this intervention is $0 and the 5 seconds it took to rinse the shells before saving them. A bottle of commercial calcium spray at your garden center costs between $12 and $18 and delivers approximately 6% calcium by volume. Eggshell tea made with apple cider vinegar delivers soluble calcium at a concentration that independent testing has shown to be comparable to commercial liquid calcium products, at a cost again of $0. Method 4. The pest barrier, the benefit. Nobody advertises. This is the method that surprises most people because it has nothing to do with soil nutrition. Crushed eggshells, kept coarse, not powdered, pieces roughly the size of small gravel, create an effective physical barrier against soft-bodied crawling pests. Slugs, cutworms, and certain beetles navigate by dragging their undersides along the soil surface. Coarse shell fragments are, to these insects, what broken glass is to bare feet. The sharp edges lacerate the soft tissue. The pests do not cross the barrier. Create a ring of coarse crushed shell approximately 2 inches wide around the base of each vulnerable plant. Transplants, in their first 2 weeks, before the stem has lignified and hardened, are the most vulnerable. A ring of shells applied. The same evening you transplant provides immediate physical protection with 0 chemical input. Reapply after heavy rain, which can bury or dissolve the shell fragments, but in dry periods, a single application will last 4 to 6 weeks. Again, by coincidence, precisely the window of time during which transplant stems are most vulnerable to cutworm damage. This method stacks directly on top of the transplant hole method. Shells in the hole feeding the roots, shells on the surface protecting the stem. One material collected for free over winter, doing 2 separate jobs simultaneously. A retired nurse in rural Pennsylvania has maintained a kitchen garden on the same half-acre plot for 23 years. She has never purchased a bag of garden lime. She has never bought a bottle of calcium spray. She has never lost a tomato crop to blossom end rot. Every shell from every egg her family eats goes into a paper bag on the kitchen counter. Every spring, that bag gets crushed and worked into the soil. That is the entirety of her calcium management program. I asked her when she learned to do this. She said her mother taught her. I asked where her mother learned it. She said her grandmother brought it from Poland when she immigrated in 1923. 4 generations. 100 years on American soil. Not 1 bag of lime. Not 1 bottle of calcium spray. and soil that a neighbor, a conventional gardener who spends over $300 per season on soil amendments, described to her last summer as the best-looking garden bed he had ever put his hands in. In Chicago, an urban gardener manages 4 raised beds on a second-floor deck. No in-ground soil, no access to a yard. She saves every eggshell from her household, dries them in her oven on the lowest setting, and crushes them in a blender kept specifically for this purpose. The powder goes into her raised bed mix every spring and into her transplant holes every May. She told me she used to lose at least a third of her tomatoes every year to blossom and rot. She thought it was the variety. She switched varieties 3 times. The rot kept coming. Then she started the Eggshell program 3 years ago. In those 3 years, she has had 6 cases of blossom and rot across 4 beds. Not 6 plants, 6 individual fruits. She calculated that she has saved approximately $180 in calcium supplements over 3 seasons on a second-floor deck in Chicago, with shells she was going to throw away. And at a community garden in upstate New York, the same one that started the banana peel collection program, a parallel eggshell collection system launched 2 years ago. Members bring clean, dried shells when they come to tend their plots. The shells are crushed communally and stored in labeled containers available to all 32 plot holders. Soil tests taken at the start and end of each season show a consistent upward trend in soil pH across the site, moving from an average of 5.8 when the program started to 6.4 after 2 years of application. The garden coordinator reports that blossom end rot complaints from members have dropped by approximately 70% since the program began. No product was purchased. No corporate account received payment. 32 families grew better food because they stopped throwing away the thing that was fixing their soil for free. That is the whole story. That is all it ever was. Here is what 100 billion discarded eggshells actually represents. It represents 100 billion units of free calcium carbonate that American households are paying to send to a landfill, and then paying again to replace with commercial lime, calcium sprays, and pH correction products that together generate over $1 billion in annual revenue for an industry that depends on you never making that connection. It represents a paper published by Mikhail Gorski in 1887 that documented exactly what those shells can do, a paper that has been sitting in an archive in Krakow for over 60 years without being opened. It represents a retired nurse in Pennsylvania whose grandmother carried this knowledge from Europe in 1923 and never let it go, even as every garden center in America was telling her generation that what they needed was in a bag, not in a bowl on the kitchen counter. And it represents the most straightforward act of reclamation available to any American gardener right now, this morning, at breakfast. The next shell does not go in the trash. It goes in a jar, and that jar sits on your counter all winter. And in the spring, it goes into your soil. And your soil gets better, and next season it is better still, and the season after that, better again. No bag, no truck, no invoice. No corporation between you and the calcium that was sitting in your breakfast this morning. Here at Forbidden Survival, we are not teaching you to garden differently. We are teaching you to remember what gardening was before someone figured out how to sell it back to you in pieces. The knowledge that fed Helena Wojcik's family for generations did not disappear. It is in the archives in Krakow. It is in the kitchens of families who never stopped saving the pot above the stove. And now it is here. If this changed the way you looked at your egg carton this morning, leave a comment and tell me. I read every single one. Subscribe to Forbidden Results, because we are just getting started. They buried this for 70 years. We are digging it up, one shell at a time.